November 10, 1960. Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan. The NYPD opened a locked meat warehouse and found 8 Irish men still alive after 7 days in chains. No food, almost no water, 0 sleep. This wasn't revenge or rage. It was a strategic message about money and territory. So how did they survive? And why did New York's most violent gangs suddenly fall silent? To understand the outcome, we have to return to the moment $180,000 vanished. Harlem at 6:23 in the morning felt like a coffin waiting to be nailed shut. November cold cut through the windows like a blade between ribs. Duke Ellington bled from a radio 2 floors down, while men gulped coffee that tasted like rust and got ready for jobs that would grind their spines into powder by age 50. The streets still carried yesterday's filth. Newspapers tumbled past gutters where rats the size of cats fought over chicken bones. The city smelled like exhaust and desperation and something rotting that nobody wanted to identify. Bumpy Johnson sat at his kitchen table staring at coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The phone rang and his hand moved to it like a man reaching for a loaded gun. Marcus Williams's voice came through the line tight and strangled. "Boss, the safe on 142nd. Someone cracked it open." Bumpy's jaw locked. His knuckles went white on the receiver. "How much did they take?" "Everything. 180,000. Every dollar. Every cent. Gone." The number hit like a hammer to the temple. $180,000. 3 years of bleeding Harlem dry in policy money and protection payments, and under-the-table deals with cops who sold their badges for envelopes stuffed with cash. That money kept politicians from asking questions, and judges from signing warrants, and precinct captains from raiding the numbers joints that kept half of Harlem employed. Losing it meant more than going broke. It meant looking weak. And in this business, weak men got their throats opened in alleys and left for the sanitation crews to scrape off the pavement. "Get everyone who knew about that safe into a room within the hour," Bumpy said. His voice came out flat and dead like a coroner reading names off toe tags. "I want to know who was where, who they talked to, who they owed money to, who they were screwing. I want to know what they ate for breakfast and who they sat next to when they ate it. You understand me, Marcus?" Marcus understood. "Yes, sir. I will make the calls." Bumpy hung up and sat in the dark while Harlem woke up outside like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The safe sat behind a false wall in a social club that laundered money 6 nights a week. Only 5 people on Earth knew the combination. The lock was Mosler grade, bank quality, the kind that required a professional safecracker or someone with the exact sequence of numbers. The alarm was wired to 3 locations. If someone tried drilling through the steel, bells would scream before the bit made it an inch deep. But there had been no alarm. No drill marks. No blown hinges. No pry bar scratches. Just an empty safe with its door hanging open like a gutted fish. Somebody had walked in calm as Sunday morning, spun the dial through the correct combination, pulled out 6 months of operating capital in banded stacks, and walked back into the Harlem night without leaving a hair or a fingerprint or a witness who saw anything worth remembering. 5 people knew that combination. Bumpy, his accountant Samuel, who had arthritis so bad he could barely hold a pencil. His head of security, Jerome, who had taken 2 bullets for Bumpy in 1957 and still limped when it rained. His lieutenant Ray, who had been with him since the war and had never stolen a dollar in 20 years. And the building owner who had installed the safe in 1958, then moved to Philadelphia and died of a coronary while eating breakfast in 1959. Which meant someone had gotten the combination from one of 3 men Bumpy trusted with his life. Or one of those 3 men had sold him out for a cut of $180,000. Bumpy walked to his study and poured Barolo 1934 into a glass. Hold it up to the gray morning light coming through the curtains. The wine looked like old wounds. He did not drink it. Just watched it catch the light and thought about betrayal, and what you do when the people closest to you put a knife in your back and twist it while smiling to your face. He had built Harlem on 3 foundations: respect earned by keeping his word, fear earned by breaking the bones of anyone who tested him, and the absolute certainty that stealing from Bumpy Johnson meant paying a price that made the theft meaningless. The money was gone. Fine. Money was paper. Money could be replaced, but the certainty had been shattered. And if he did not rebuild it fast and brutal and permanent, every crew from the Bronx to Brooklyn would look at Harlem like it was a buffet table with no one guarding the door. Power does not vanish when you lose money, Bumpy said to the empty room. It vanishes when people believe you will not do what you promised. When they start thinking maybe you are too old or too soft or too scared to deliver the consequences you built your reputation on. He set the glass down without touching it, picked up the phone, made the first call that would lead to 8 men learning that some lessons cannot be taught with words. Some lessons require chains and darkness and time measured in heartbeats instead of hours. Some lessons turn living men into warnings that echo through the underworld for decades. Hell's Kitchen sat on the west side of Manhattan like an open wound that refused to heal. Irish tenements stacked 6 stories high with laundry hanging between buildings like surrender flags. Warehouses full of stolen goods and bars that opened at sunrise and closed when the last drunk finally stopped bleeding money. The Westies ran it with fists and tire irons and the kind of violence that made the Italians look like altar boys. They broke legs over $10 debts. They put men in the hospital over parking spots. They burned down businesses that refused to pay protection, then charged the owners for cleaning up the ashes. Vito Genovese kept them on a leash the way you keep a pit bull. Feed them scraps. Let them think they mattered. Use them when he needed someone's spine separated from their skull and could not afford to get his own hands dirty. The Westies were not made of men. They were not family. They were hammers. And when Genovese needed a nail driven through Bumpy Johnson's reputation, he knew exactly which hammer to pick up. Mickey Featherstone sat in the back of Coogan's pub on 10th Avenue with 7 of his crew drinking Jameson like water and celebrating like men who had just robbed a bank and gotten away clean. The bar reeked of spilled beer and cigarette ash and decades of bad decisions. The jukebox played Irish rebel songs. The bartender kept pouring and kept his mouth shut because bartenders who heard too much in Hell's Kitchen ended up in the Hudson wearing concrete galoshes. That Negro up in Harlem thinks he is some kind of king, Mickey said loud enough for the whole bar to hear. Thinks because he broke some Sicilian's hand 3 years ago that makes him untouchable. Well, I got news for Bumpy Johnson. His kingdom just got robbed and there is not a damn thing he can do about it. Jimmy Coonan slammed his glass on the table. That safe opened smoother than your sister on a Saturday night. 3 minutes from picking the lock to walking out with $180,000 in cash. Easiest score we ever pulled. The table erupted in laughter. Eddie McElroy started counting $100 bills in stacks, showing them off like trophies. This is what happens when you let a black man think he runs something. They get comfortable. They get sloppy. They forget that this city belongs to us, not them. But this was not just about money, and the ones with brains knew it. This was Genovese testing Bumpy, seeing if a Negro would dare cross into Irish territory to get revenge, seeing if skin color still mattered more than stolen cash, seeing if the peace that had held since 1956 was real or just smoke and mirrors kept alive by men too afraid to strike the match. "You think he will come for us?" Tommy Collins asked. He was 23 and still young enough to believe myths mattered more than reality. Mickey grinned like a wolf. "Come here? To Hell's Kitchen? Protected by Genovese?" He would have to be insane. Bumpy is smart. He knows 180,000 is not worth starting a war with the Italians. He will take the loss, make some noise, send some threats. But actually put his hands on us? Never happening. Sean Murphy lit a cigarette and blew smoke at the ceiling. Even if he wanted to, what is he going to do? Walk in here and start swinging? We are Irish. We are white. We are protected by the biggest mob family in New York. He is a Negro running numbers in a neighborhood the Italians let him keep because it was not worth the bullets. There is a food chain in this business, and he is not at the top of it. They kept drinking, keep flashing money they should have buried, kept running their mouths in a bar where the walls had ears and the bartender had a photographic memory, and loose talk traveled faster than gonorrhea through a whorehouse. By midnight they had bought rounds for strangers and bragged to women who told their boyfriends, who told their crew, who told someone who knew someone who worked for Bumpy Johnson. 8 men robbed that safe. Mickey Featherstone, Jimmy Coonan, Eddie McElroy, Tommy Collins, Sean Murphy, Billy Beatty, Richie Ryan, Kevin Kelly. Every one of them thought geography and skin color and Genovese's protection made them bulletproof. Every one of them thought the hard part was cracking the safe and the easy part was spending the money. Every one of them made the fatal mistake that has gotten men killed since Cain picked up a rock and realized his brother's skull was softer than he thought. They believed someone else would pay their bill. They believed the consequences were for other people. They believed that stealing from a black man in 1960 carried no risk because this was still a world where white skin bought immunity and black rage got you strung up from a tree. They were wrong on all 3 counts. And wrong in Bumpy Johnson's world meant learning lessons that turned strong men into sobbing children, begging for mercy that would never come. In this business, there are rules that matter, and rules that are just decoration. Money matters. Respect matters. The ability to make examples so brutal that people talk about them in whispers for decades matters. What does not matter is skin color when someone steals from you. What does not matter is geography when someone violates the one thing you told the entire underworld never to touch. What does not matter is who protects you, because protection only works if the person coming for you cares about avoiding war. Bumpy Johnson did not care about avoiding war. He cared about ending questions. And the Westies had just asked a question that would be answered in a freezing meat warehouse with industrial chains and no food and no water and no sleep for 7 days. That would strip 8 men down to nothing but animal fear and broken pride. The biggest mistake you can make in this world is believing that someone else will die in your place, that your debts will be paid by magic, that your actions carry no consequences if you have the right friends. Because when the door locks and the lights go out and time stops meaning anything except the space between one breath and the next, you are alone with what you did. And if you did it to Bumpy Johnson, alone is where you will learn that some men do not forgive and do not forget and do not stop until the lesson has been carved so deep into your bones that you feel it every morning for the rest of your miserable life. Bumpy Johnson did not reach for his gun. He reached for his phone book, the one with grease stains on the cover and numbers written in pencil that could be erased when people stopped being useful or started being liabilities. He flipped through pages until he found the section marked with a red X in the corner. These were not soldiers. These were ghosts. The people nobody noticed. The ones who poured drinks and delivered mail and swept floors and heard everything while being treated like furniture. He called Danny, the bartender at McSorley's on 7th Avenue. "Danny, I need to know who has been spending Irish money in the last 48 hours. Big bills. Hundreds. The kind of cash that working men do not carry unless they just scored something they should not have." Danny's voice came back cautious. "That is going to cost you, Bumpy. Information like that, people find out I talked. I am done in this neighborhood." Bumpy's voice stayed flat. $10 now. 20 more when it checks out. And Danny, nobody finds out you talked unless you tell them. I keep my sources breathing. He made 11 more calls. To the postal worker who sorted mail at the Hell's Kitchen station. to the woman who cleaned the toilets at Coogan's pub, to the taxi driver who worked the overnight shift on 10th Avenue, to the numbers runner who collected bets from Irish longshoremen at the docks. Each call cost $10. Each call bought a piece of the puzzle. By noon he had 8 names. By 3 p.m. he had 8 addresses. By 6 p.m. he knew their schedules down to what time they took their evening drinks and which doors they used, and who would be home when the knock came. "Information is cheaper than bullets," Bumpy told his Lieutenant Ray as they spread maps across the kitchen table. "Bullets make noise. Bullets bring cops. Bullets start wars. Information just sits there quietly until you are ready to use it. Then it cuts deeper than any blade." Ray studied the addresses marked in red. "These guys are spread across Hell's Kitchen. We cannot hit them one at a time. They will hear about the first one and scatter like rats. We do it simultaneously. All 8 in one move. No warning, no time to run." Bumpy nodded. "That is exactly right. We hit them at 2:47 in the morning. That is when drunks are passed out and working men are sleeping the deepest. That is when even the insomniacs finally close their eyes. We go in fast. We go silent. We bag them and we are gone before their neighbors figure out what the noise was." They assembled 16 men, 2 per target. Each pair got photographs and addresses and strict instructions. No guns unless absolutely necessary. No killing unless the target forced it. Use chloroform and canvas bags and move like you are stealing cars, not kidnapping men. Get them unconscious, get them in the vehicles. Get them to the warehouse on the west side where the meat trucks used to park before the refrigeration company went bankrupt in 1957. "Why are we not just killing them?" one of the younger soldiers asked. He was 25 and still believed that violence was about domination instead of calculation. Bumpy looked at him like a teacher looks at a student who just asked why water is wet. "Because dead men are forgotten. Dead men get buried and mourned, and after 6 months nobody remembers what they did or why they died. But living men carry stories. Living men walk around for decades reminding everyone what happens when you steal from someone you should not have stolen from." He paused. "Let that sink in. We are not ending a problem. We are creating a warning. The kind of warning that makes people think twice before they touch what is mine. The kind that gets repeated in bars and barber shops until it becomes legend. You kill these 8 men, and tomorrow 8 more will try their luck, because death is quick, and everyone thinks it will not happen to them. But you break these men in ways that leave them breathing, but hollowed out, and suddenly nobody wants to be the next example." The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 was intelligence. Completed. Phase 2 was captured. Scheduled for 2:47 a.m. Phase 3 was education. That would take 7 days. 7 days in a warehouse with no heat and no food and water, delivered in amounts just sufficient to keep hearts beating, but minds deteriorating. 7 days chained to support beams with wrists locked behind backs and ankles shackled 18 inches apart. So sitting was agony, and standing was impossible. 7 days listening to each other, break down one scream, and sob and begging prayer at a time. "No one touches them," Bumpy said. "No fists, no pipes, no knives. Just time and cold, and the knowledge that nobody is coming to save them. Let their own minds do the work. Let them imagine what comes next until the imagining is worse than anything we could actually do. That is how you break men, not with pain, with uncertainty, with the slow realization that the rules they thought protected them mean nothing, and the people they thought would rescue them have forgotten they exist." November 3rd, 1960. 2:47 a.m. 16 men moved through Hell's Kitchen like ghosts in the fog. Doors opened, bags went over heads, bodies went limp from chloroform. 8 men who went to sleep thinking they had gotten away with the perfect crime woke up chained in a freezing warehouse, discovering that perfect crimes only exist in movies and real life has consequences that arrive when you least expect them. The warehouse sat on the edge of the West Side waterfront, where the Hudson River met the dying industrial heart of Manhattan. It had been a meat processing facility until the owner got caught selling horse meat as beef, and the health department shut him down in 1957. Now it was just empty space and rusted hooks hanging from the ceiling and industrial freezer units that still worked when you flipped the breakers. The floor was concrete. The walls were cinder block. The windows had been bricked over years ago. The sound did not escape. Light did not enter. Time stopped meaning anything except the space between heartbeats. They chained the 8 men to support beams spaced 15 feet apart so they could hear each other, but not see each other clearly, in the dim light from the single bulb hanging near the door. Wrists locked behind their backs with industrial cuffs that cut circulation if you struggled. Ankles shackled 18 inches apart, close enough that you could not sit without your knees buckling, far enough that you could not stand without your thighs screaming. The position was specifically designed by prison wardens in the 1800s to break men without leaving marks. Called stress positioning, legal in some countries, torture in others, effective everywhere. Day 1, the 8 men still had fights in them. Mickey Featherstone screamed threats. "You are dead, Bumpy. You hear me? Genovese will gut you like a fish for this. We are protected. You just signed your own death warrant." Jimmy Coonan thrashed against his chains until his wrists started leaking red down his forearms. Eddie McElroy tried reasoning. "This is a mistake. We can work this out. Name your price. We will pay double, triple. Just let us out of here." But nobody answered. Nobody came. The door stayed locked. The light stayed dim. The temperature dropped as the old refrigeration units kicked on, and the warehouse transformed into a freezer designed to preserve meat by keeping it just above the point where tissue starts dying. 40 degrees. Cold enough to make teeth chatter. Cold enough to make fingers go numb. Cold enough that after 12 hours your body stops generating enough heat to compensate, and hypothermia starts creeping in slowly and patient like a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to run. Day 2, their voices got quieter. The screaming stopped because screaming burns calories, and calories were the only thing keeping them alive. They got 1 cup of water every 12 hours delivered by a man in a ski mask who said nothing and left before anyone could finish begging. No food. No bathroom breaks. They urinated where they stood and felt it run down their legs and pool around their feet, and then freeze into a crust that stuck to their skin. The smell was immediate and nauseating. Within 24 hours, the warehouse reeked of human waste and fear of sweat, and something primal that only appears when men realize they are no longer in control of anything, including their own bodies. Sleep was impossible. Every time their eyes closed, their knees buckled, and the chains pulled their arms further up their backs until the shoulder sockets screamed. So they stayed awake. 60 hours. 70. 80. The human brain is not designed to function without sleep. After 3 days, the hallucinations started. Tommy Collins thought he saw his mother standing in the corner, cried like a child, called out to her. She did not answer because she was not there and had never been there. And Tommy's mind was fracturing under the weight of exhaustion and cold and the dawning realization that nobody was coming to save him. Day 3 was when the crying began. Not the angry crying of men who still have pride. The broken crying of animals in traps who have chewed through their own legs and realized the leg is still caught. Sean Murphy sobbed so hard he hyperventilated and passed out. Woke up choking, sobbed again. Billy Beatty started praying in a voice so hoarse it sounded like gravel scraping metal. "Please, God, please, I am sorry, I am so sorry, just make it stop. Please make it stop." Day 4, the begging turned personal. "Bumpy, please, we will give the money back, all of it. We will work for you. We will do anything. Just let us out. Please, we have families. We have kids. They need us. But the door stayed locked, and the masked man kept delivering water, and nobody said a word, because talking to them would have implied they were still human beings, having a conversation, instead of objects being processed through a system designed to strip away everything that made them think they mattered. Day 5, the personalities started disintegrating. Kevin Kelly screamed that he was President of the United States and demanded to speak to his cabinet. Richie Ryan laughed for 4 hours straight. The kind of laughing that has nothing to do with humor, and everything to do with a mind that has given up trying to make sense of reality. The smell in the warehouse was beyond description. Waste and sweat and rotting teeth and fear. It soaked into the concrete, into the walls, into the men themselves, until they could not remember what clean air smelled like, or what it felt like to stand without pain or sleep without chains. Day 6, they stopped talking entirely, stopped begging, stopped praying. Just hung there making sounds that were not quite words, whimpering when they exhaled, moaning when they shifted weight. Their eyes had gone vacant, their faces slack. Whatever had been inside them that made them Mickey Featherstone, the feared enforcer, or Jimmy Coonan, the tough guy, or Eddie McElroy, the big talker, had been stripped away like meat from bones. What was left was just biology, just nerve endings and survival instinct, and the most primitive fear that lives at the base of the human brain, where language does not exist. Day 7, they were barely conscious. Dehydration had made their tongues swell. Hypothermia had turned their skin gray. Their legs shook constantly from exhaustion. Some had stopped urinating because their kidneys were shutting down. They hung from their chains like gutted deer. Still breathing, still technically alive, but hollowed out. Emptied. Reduced to nothing except the most basic understanding that they had done something terrible and paid for it with every second of 7 days that would live inside them until they died of old age or liver failure or the nightmares that would wake them screaming for the next 40 years. The worst pain is not physical. It is not broken bones or cut flesh or even dying slow from cold and thirst. The worst pain is when you look in the mirror of your own mind and do not recognize what looks back. When the person you thought you were gets stripped away, and what remains is just animal terror and shame so deep, it rewrites your DNA. That is what 7 days in chains does. It does not kill you. It kills who you were, and forces you to live with what is left. November 10th, 1960. 7 a.m. A van pulled up 3 blocks from St. Vincent's Hospital in Greenwich Village, and the back doors swung open. 8 men tumbled out onto the sidewalk like garbage bags full of broken machinery. They did not walk. They could not walk. Their legs had forgotten how. They crawled, dragged themselves across concrete still wet with morning dew, left trails of filth behind them because their bodies had stopped functioning in ways that required dignity or control. A nurse arriving for her shift saw them and screamed, called for orderlies. Within minutes, doctors were rushing out with gurneys and blankets and questions that nobody could answer because the 8 men could not form words yet. Their tongues were swollen from dehydration, their throats were raw from screaming. Their minds were so fractured that when doctors asked their names, 3 of them could not remember. Just stared with eyes that had seen something that rewired how human brains process fear. Mickey Featherstone weighed 142 pounds. He had weighed 170 when he walked into Coogan's pub celebrating the robbery. 28 pounds lost in 7 days. His wrists were infected where the cuffs had cut through skin. His legs were covered in frostbite. His kidneys were failing. But the worst damage was not visible on X-rays. It was in his eyes. In the way he flinched when anyone touched him. In the way he wept when a nurse brought him water and he could not lift his hands to hold the cup. Jimmy Coonan had chewed through his lower lip during the hallucinations on day 5. Bit down so hard he severed an artery and spent 6 hours tasting his own fluids while his mind convinced him he was drowning. Tommy Collins had dislocated both shoulders trying to break free from the chains. Sean Murphy had lost 3 teeth grinding his jaw in his sleep, except he had not slept. So the grinding never stopped for 80 hours straight, until the molars just cracked and fell out. The doctors could fix the bodies. IV fluids for dehydration, antibiotics for infections, heating blankets for hypothermia, sedatives for the shaking that would not stop even after they were warm and hydrated and technically safe. But they could not fix what 7 days had done to the architecture of their personalities. Could not rebuild the part of Mickey Featherstone that used to walk into bars like he owned them. Could not restore the swagger Jimmy Coonan used to carry like a weapon. Could not give back the certainty that they were dangerous men who commanded respect and fear. What came back from that warehouse was not the same 8 men who got loaded into the van at 2:47 a.m. on November 3rd. What came back was 8 cautionary tales wrapped in skin that remembered how to breathe, but forgot how to be anything except afraid. No apology came, no explanation, no money returned. Just 8 men dropped at a hospital like broken merchandise with a message attached that did not need words because the message was written in frostbite and infected wrists and eyes that could not hold contact for more than 2 seconds before looking away in shame. While the doctors were pumping fluids into collapsed veins and wrapping frostbitten toes that would eventually require amputation, a messenger arrived at the Ravenite Social Club on Mulberry Street, where Vito Genovese held court 6 days a week. The messenger was a black kid, maybe 16 years old, wearing a Harlem numbers runner jacket that identified him as clearly as a badge. He walked past the bodyguards who reached for their guns and stopped when they saw he was carrying nothing except an envelope. "I got a delivery for Mr. Genovese," the kid said. His voice did not shake. Genovese's underboss grabbed the envelope and opened it while keeping the kid covered. Inside was a single photograph. 8 men chained to beams in a freezing warehouse, faces slack, bodies broken, filth pooled around their feet, and on the back, written in handwriting so neat it looked like it came from a typewriter, 1 sentence. "Next time it is permanent." No signature, no threat, no explanation. Just that 1 sentence that communicated more than a 1,000-word manifesto ever could. Genovese looked at the photograph for 30 seconds without speaking. His jaw worked like he was chewing something tough. His fingers tightened on the paper until it crinkled. Then he handed it back to his underboss and said 3 words. "Leave Harlem alone." The kid turned and walked out. Nobody stopped him. Nobody followed him. Because following him would have meant acknowledging that a 16-year-old numbers runner had just walked into the heart of Genovese territory and delivered a message that rewrote the power structure of New York. And acknowledging that would have meant admitting that Bumpy Johnson had just done something the 5 families combined could not do. He had drawn a line so brutal and unambiguous that even men who built empires on violence understood it was not worth crossing. The Westies waited for the Genovese to retaliate, waited for the war they had been promised would come if anyone ever touched them. Mickey Featherstone sent word from his hospital bed asking when they would hit back, when they would show Bumpy Johnson that you could not kidnap and torture 8 made associates without consequences. The answer came back through intermediaries who did not want to be seen talking to men who had become liabilities. "There will be no retaliation. You are on your own. Do not mention our name again." Abandoned, cut loose, thrown away like they had never mattered in the first place, because they had not mattered. They had been tools. And when tools break in ways that cost more to fix than replace, you throw them away and buy new ones. Genovese had wanted to test Bumpy, to see if a black man would really cross into white territory to recover his reputation. The test had been answered, definitively, brutally, with such precision that further testing seemed like suicide. No war came, no bullets flew, no bodies turned up in the Hudson. Just 8 men who spent the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders and flinching at loud noises and waking up screaming from dreams where they were back in that warehouse with the chains cutting into their wrists and the cold seeping into their bones and the knowledge that nobody was coming to save them because nobody cared enough to try. When your enemy does not fight back, it means one of two things. Either they are too weak to retaliate, or they understand that retaliating would cost more than the original offense was worth. Genovese was not weak. He was practical. And the math was simple. $180,000 and 8 broken men versus a war with a man who had just proven he would cross any line and violate any boundary to protect what was his. The equation did not balance. The war was not worth it. Harlem stayed independent. Bumpy stayed untouched. And the underworld learned a lesson that would be repeated in bars and social clubs for decades. Some men you can negotiate with. Some men you can intimidate. Some men you can buy. And some men you leave alone because testing them costs more than winning ever could. Mickey Featherstone never walked right again. The frostbite took 3 toes on his left foot and 4 on his right. The infection in his wrists left scars that circled his arms like bracelets. But the worst damage was neurological. He developed a stutter that made him sound like a broken record. Started drinking before noon and did not stop until he passed out. By 1962, he was working as a janitor in a building he used to collect protection money from. The crews that used to fear him crossed the street to avoid watching him mop floors. He died in 1971 of liver failure. 41 years old, looking 70. The obituary was 4 lines long and mentioned nothing about his years with the Westies. Jimmy Coonan moved to Boston and tried rebuilding his reputation from scratch. Told people he had been in prison for armed robbery instead of admitting he had spent 7 days in chains begging for mercy. It worked for 6 months until someone from New York recognized him in a bar and told the real story. He got beaten so badly his jaw had to be wired shut. After that he stopped trying, worked construction, kept his head down. Died in 1979 when scaffolding collapsed on a job site. The guys who worked with him said he had been acting strange that morning. Jumpy kept looking over his shoulder like someone was following him. Eddie McElroy became a police informant, started feeding information to the NYPD about Irish mob operations because he figured if he could not be feared, he could at least be useful. He lasted 9 months before someone put a bullet in the back of his head in a parking lot in Queens. The cops wrote it up as a robbery gone wrong, even though his wallet was still in his pocket and his watch was still on his wrist. Tommy Collins, Sean Murphy, Billy Beatty, Richie Ryan, and Kevin Kelly all followed similar trajectories. Drank too much, worked dead-end jobs, jumped at shadows. Some moved away. Some stayed in Hell's Kitchen and became ghosts haunting bars where they used to be somebody. All of them died before hitting 60. Heart attacks, strokes, car accidents that were not quite accidents. The kind of deaths that happen to men who live with stress so constant it rewrites their cardiovascular systems. None of them ever spoke publicly about what happened in that warehouse. When people asked, they said they did not remember. When people pressed, they changed the subject. When people would not let it go, they walked away. Because talking about it meant reliving it, and reliving it meant returning to that place in their minds where chains cut wrists and cold froze bones, and time stopped meaning anything except the space between one breath and the next. Nobody wanted to go back there, not even in memory. Not even to explain why they flinched when doors closed, or why they could not sleep in the dark, or why they started crying for no reason in the middle of conversations about nothing. For 8 years after November 1960, nobody touched Harlem. No crews tried expanding into Bumpy's territory. No independents tried setting up competing numbers operations. No gang tried robbing his policy banks or shaking down his runners. The neighborhood became untouchable not because Bumpy had an army, but because he had proven he would do things that made armies irrelevant. He had proven that consequences could be delivered surgical and personal, and so devastating that the memory of them prevented future attempts better than any amount of bullets or bodies ever could. His reputation hit levels that transcended the normal hierarchy of organized crime. The Italians ran New York, but they ran around Harlem. The Irish controlled Hell's Kitchen, but they controlled it with the understanding that certain lines were never to be crossed. The Jews had their operations, the blacks had theirs. And at the center of it all was Bumpy Johnson, the man who had turned 8 thieves into permanent warnings without killing a single one of them. The story spread, got embellished, got repeated until it became legend. They said he had kept them in the dark for a month. They said he had cut off fingers and cauterized the wounds to keep them alive longer. They said he had played recordings of their families begging for their release while doing nothing to help. Most of it was not true, but it did not matter, because the truth was bad enough that the exaggerations felt plausible. And in the world of organized crime, perception is reality. If people believe you are capable of something, you might as well have done it. By 1968, when Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack in a Harlem restaurant, his funeral drew thousands. Politicians, judges, police captains, criminals from every family in New York. They came not because they loved him, but because they respected the rules he had enforced. The understanding that some territories were sovereign, that some men could not be bought or broken or bullied. That power came not from how many people you could kill, but from how many people you could convince never to test you in the first place. The lesson became law, written not in books or courtrooms, but in the decisions made by crews looking at territory and calculating risk. Harlem stayed independent for another generation. The neighborhood changed, the players changed, the drugs and money and politics changed. But the foundation Bumpy built remained. A foundation constructed from 180,000 stolen dollars and 8 men who learned that stealing from the wrong person does not get you killed. It gets you returned. Broken. Breathing. Living proof that some mistakes are not fatal. They are just permanent. Real power does not come from the number of bodies you stack. It comes from the number of fights you prevent by making the cost so clear that nobody wants to pay it. Bumpy Johnson killed dozens of men in his career, but his greatest victory was the 8 men he let live, because those 8 men did more to protect Harlem than all the bullets he ever fired. They walked through the world as warnings, as proof, as living monuments to the simple truth that some men draw lines in concrete instead of sand. And when you cross those lines, you do not die. You just wish you had. This story is shared for historical insight and personal reflection, not to promote violence or illegal behavior. Thank you for watching until the end. These stories take weeks of research and writing to create. If this resonated with you, if you see the lesson Bumpy Johnson was teaching about accountability and education over violence, hit that subscribe button. Help us reach 1 million subscribers so we can keep telling stories that matter. Stories about power used wisely. Stories about consequences faced honestly. Stories about men who chose to change systems instead of just destroying enemies. The next video drops soon. Until then, remember, real power is not what you can destroy. It is what you choose to build.